welcome and introduce to others two distinguished speakers this evening. First, we have Manchester's own Dr. Tysana Jones. And second, we'll hear from Dr. Dan Hawley. Dr. Tysana Jones is an educator with a passion for work and focuses on education and quality education for equity and quality education for all children. Her work is centered on special education and teacher preparation. She provides supports to school districts and leaders through She provides support to school districts and leaders through creating systems to address disparities. She identifies special education services for Black, Brown, and children in poverty. She is the board president of MindWorks Collaborative, a nonprofit organization that supports special education leaders of color. Dr. Jones received a bachelor in special education at North Carolina A&T, a master's in special education with an emphasis on autism from the University of Kansas, and a doctorate of special education from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Jones comes to us this evening to lead the discussion on Pittsburgh vanished neighborhoods.
Hi, good evening. So some of you I haven't seen since February in the snowstorm. I think we're good tonight. And some of you I haven't seen since way before that. Okay, so I'm not gonna be before you long. I'm glad that I was able to come back and kind of start this conversation. Being back in Pittsburgh, me and God was like, what are we doing here? But every time something like this happens, I'm like, okay, the vision's getting clearer. So if you missed the video, if you missed the event in February, there's a few things I want to lift up. Debbie brought up Bubby, and Bubby gave us some words, and I just want to lift up some of the words that Bubby left us with, because we are standing truly on the heels of giants, on the shoulders of these giants. And Manchester is such a special place. We all have stories, and we shared some of our stories back in February. Let me get my little list together. So, I want to get Bubby's quotes. So, if you go back, if you missed it in February, you can go and see it on YouTube. The video is there, it's great. But Bubby said us that evening, he says, you may ask yourself, what are giants? Giants are people who have evolved character, intellect, compassion, and commitments much greater than ours. Giants are people who often believe in us before we believed in ourselves. When we say their names, they are still with us. Manchester, as we know it today, would not exist without the giants who came before us, such as Father Jack O'Malley, Lyndon Nelson, Betty and Arthur Ralph, Katherine Johnson, Pat Washington, and many others. Their legacy insists that we continue their work and speak the truth of what is occurring in the neighborhood. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King stated, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at the times of challenge and controversy. A true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. And I would like to say that we are not in the space of comfort. We are not in the space of convenience. Unfortunately, for some of us, it feels that way. We like where we live. We can go to the store, we go to Target and buy stuff off our list, and we're good. But the reality is, we are dealing with a whole lot. It's happening around us. And we think we're making decisions, but there's a lot of decisions that are being made that we are not making. And so as we think about what's happening right now, we have to be very serious and intentional about how we spend our time, our energy, and where we're putting our energy and our effort into if we want to do anything for Manchester and any other Black community in Pittsburgh or around this country. So I say it a lot, but Pittsburgh truly is a special place. And we talked about how the historic designation has saved Manchester in many ways in comparison to the other Black neighborhoods in this city. And as I was preparing for February, I learned that my mom was a part of that push to get the historic designation. So we have this amazing, beautiful historic homes, Victorians, the largest inventory of Victorian homes in Manchester in the city. We also we're the only Black neighborhood that has a historic designation. This is not by accident. we have something that is extremely precious, and people know about our city all over the country. A lot of times when we're in it, we don't even know how dope it is because we take it for granted. And so I left here after high school with no intentions of coming back, y'all. I just was out. Okay, I was out. I bought me a Steelers sweatshirt, and I represent. I went to the games. I would leave church when I was in Vegas, had my little dress on and my Steelers tie in my purse, but I wouldn't move back. Okay, but here we are. God, He saw the reason, right? And so we're here, but I want to tell you some of the things that I've seen. And when I first got out of college, I went to DC. To me, that was like the pre-masters. Everybody black went to DC in the 90s. It was like Chocolate City, let's get it, right? So I was getting it. I got all of it. And 14th and U was my jam. I could probably get mail at Public Gardens. I was there so much. But it was black. And it was good to be around black people doing black stuff. And it was like educated folks, we kicking it, we talking business, we kicking it. And it was great. But what was happening around us, we didn't even understand what was happening. I remember a woman coming to me saying, oh, Tatiana, I don't know how I'm impressed this woman, but I did. And she's like, I want you to buy a house. Oh, a house? I need to be a butterfly. I don't want a house. That means I have to be stuck somewhere. So I wasn't trying to be buying nobody's house because I didn't understand that a house meant wealth. A house meant longevity. The house that I could have bought in 1999 is $5 million. I can't even look at that house for too long without feeling broke. Okay? But I had the opportunity in 1999 to buy a house in the Shaw neighborhood. Again, the house now is $1 million. That's what we're looking at here. We are losing the possibility to do what we need to do in our community. So when I moved back to Maryland, DC 10 years later, I'm seeing white women running down the street with their dogs and strollers and babies. What the hell is going on here? Like, what happened over there? We got, what? It's like those bike lanes in Manchester. What is this? It's real different, right? And so I remember seeing my first stroller like, oh, what's this? And my girl was like, girl, they trying to see no more. It's the sprinklers. Okay. So I moved to Baltimore because I was moving back on purpose, right? And so I was very intentional about where I bought in Baltimore, but I was able to buy in Baltimore because I was leveraging relationships with where I worked. I worked for Johns Hopkins. Hated the job, but guess what I got? A house, because I was able to use the $17,000 they gave me for the down payment, because I didn't have $17,000 in my daggone bank account because I got student loans. Okay, so they had these programs. We went to NACA. We did all the programs. We were leveraging the opportunities so we could buy in these neighborhoods that most people didn't want to live in. I'm like, hey, it looks like Manchester to me. I'm living here, right? The house I bought, literally, the neighborhood is called Oliver. I went to Oliver High School. That was hilarious. And there's a North Avenue up the block from my house. There's a Federal Street on my corner. I was on Federal and Bond. There was one more street that I'm forgetting. I'm like, I'm home. I'm real home. And anyone who ever visited my house is like, damn, girl, you really got a Manchester house. I did. Okay, but I wasn't moving out to Manchester. But it was perfect for me. And it allowed me that when I did move home and sold my house, I was able to leverage the money I got. Because for 3 years, I made $100,000 on this house. Had someone told me what home owning could have done for me in 1990, my choices would have been very different from that point forward. So the reality is, it's late, it's not too late. We need to be educated about homeowning and what it does for us. The reality is our banks have done us wrong. It's a whole federal crime to discriminate against race. However, but here we are. If you look at, we have something, Stanley gives us wonderful details on things. If you look at your pamphlet, look at your folder. Let's look at this chart right here. So this first chart, we're looking at changes in population and changes in house prices, right? And so initially, looking at 2010, so this data is 2010, 2020, comparing the two. So we're looking at the Black population. People have left the city. We have the population from 2,285 to 1,731 10 years later. A decline in population. You know who they were as they were moving out, right? We also can then look at the house prices. Have they shot up double in those 10 years? So what you could do in 2010, you will not be doing in 2020. And it's only going to increase, which means the loans we already weren't getting, we sure enough not getting. So what does this mean? And how do we address it? It has to be strategic. It has to be purposeful. And we have to use the law and use each other to leverage that. How are we holding the city accountable? How are we holding the financial institutions accountable for what they're supposed to do based upon the law? The law says you can't discriminate. The law, the city of Pittsburgh passed something in 2012 and said that the financial institutions are supposed to provide opportunities and classes and programs to make sure that you're training and teaching about home ownership. But is that happening? And what does that mean? We're not buying. Also, we're not getting the loans. Let's look at that. Banks approve loans. We have 150 banks. You have applications, 1,672 applications. Loans denied, 489. Let's look at it by race. Total applications, 663 whites. Approval, 55%. Loans denied, 136. African Americans, 544 loan applications. Approval, 182. Denied, 241. Approval rate, 33%. That is clearly a disparity. What happens with this? Why is this okay? What is happening? We have that, we don't see the numbers. We don't know why people aren't getting approved. What do we know about money? How are we dealing with financial literacy? Are we putting our kids' names on bills? Are we setting kids up before it gets started? There are things that we have done historically that are not okay, but it's out of survival. We can't just be in survival because we're already behind, and it's been on purpose. But we can't add to the foolishness with bad decision making. We have to be accountable for our own actions, but we also have to hold the institutions accountable for their actions. They are not doing right by us on purpose. This country was not set up for us. We were not supposed to win. How dare us be here still? We are way past what they expected us to be. But here we are, and looking good doing it. But guess what? We can be doing better. We deserve better. Our children deserve better. Our grandchildren deserve better. It can't just be about us. We're okay, but we can be so much better. We can only be better if we're working together, collectively, and intentionally. Okay, so I'm gonna leave you all with that. I'm hyped. I'm about to start preaching up here in a minute. So I'm gonna pass this to Dan. Dan is gonna talk about so the advantage. One more, please pull this hand out. Let's look at these numbers. Okay, let's look at. Manchester did good by having organization. Manchester did great by having a historic designation. Our homes are the most expensive homes out of all of the Black communities. We do not look like Afghanistan, like some of the other places do in the city. Again, intentional, blight. If you don't have money to buy the house, and you don't own the house, you will take care of the house. It's a cycle. But if we don't take care of our own stuff, we're never going to get past, and we can't just survive. It's not working. It has to be intentional. So Manchester's the highest. You see it having smushed together. California Kirkbride is now a part of that track. The lowest being Lincoln, Leamington, Belmar, is where I live now, because I can't afford to live in Manchester with y'all. Just can't do it. And my parents had to leave because there's no accessible housing. Many of you know my mom became paralyzed in 2015. Luckily, they had already started looking somewhere else before it happened. She don't want to live out where she lives. She's miserable out there. Please go visit her. Call if you don't know. But she can't. We were just, a third story, 3-story walk up. It's not accessible. One day I came home and the TV room was on the first floor. I said, "Oh, y'all said go walking up and down them steps, huh?" Okay, but that's a reality. How many of us are in homes that we really can't access because of the autumn daggone step? At some point, if we're lucky, we get to be old. But there is no accessible housing in Manchester. We gotta think about this. No one's gonna be 19 forever. That's a reality. So we're being priced out of our homes. We know that East Liberty is a wrap. Okay, that's gone. That is too late. Point Breeze North, it's a wrap. Homewood is etching. So many of the land is already taken. I'm fighting in Belmar Gardens as we speak. Again, we have to be collective in our fight. We have to pay attention to what's going on. Okay, so I'm gonna stop. Dan, are you ready to tell us about the rest? Let's do it. Thank you all.
Dr. Dan Holland is an adjunct professor of history at Duquesne University. He earned a PhD in history from the University of Pittsburgh, a master's in nonprofit management from Carnegie Mellon University's Hines College. Dan started the Young Preservationists Association of Pittsburgh, the nation's first organization dedicated to youth involvement in historic preservation. He has served as a vice president at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition and a senior advisor for community affairs at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland's Pittsburgh branch. His forthcoming book is Communities of Resistance and Resilience in Post-Industrial City, a transnational perspective from Lyon and Pittsburgh.
I want to thank Stanley Lowe and Manchester Neighbors for inviting me here. It's always an honor. I've been working in Manchester, writing about Manchester for over 30 years, so I'm honored to be part of this next phase. And it's good to know that the neighborhood still has a tradition of rising to the occasion to tackle the latest challenge. So I'm going to talk about that this evening briefly as kind of dovetail onto what was already stated this evening. If you missed the headlines from yesterday or the day before, in 2026, the NFL draft will take place here in Pittsburgh. Everyone's getting all excited. The Detroit Free Press, where it was held in Kansas City last year. The Detroit Free Press says that it led to $164 million of economic impact and attracted over 300,000 people. So naturally, leaders here in Pittsburgh are salivating at the fact that, hey, we can attract that to come here. So as a result of the draft, Pittsburgh is planning transformations at Point State Park, Market Square, Cultural District, as part of the revitalization plan ahead of the draft. And one project proposes to create a balcony over the Allegheny River at Fort Duquesne Boulevard and the Allegheny Descent, which would be a lush walkway to the water for pedestrians. Groups such as the Allegheny Conference on Community Development, River Life Task Force have endorsed the idea. In addition, these projects are on top of 2 additional apartment developments that combined will bring more than 450 housing units at a cost of $65 million to downtown. Mayor Gainey said, "We know that there's a demand for housing downtown, young professionals that want to live in downtown. Right now, we already know the demand is there. The reality is about creating the right formula to ensure that we can do the conversion that's necessary to make downtown a neighborhood." So what does this have to do with Manchester and the North Side? Well, it's an example of what magazine The Nation calls the Disneyfication of cities, where luxury brands are buying out our cities. And seldom do these conversations include affordable housing or minority participation. And right now, as was explained, Black Pittsburgh is facing one of its most challenging moments ever. In just 10 years, the city's Black population declined by 10,660, or 13%. That's the largest decline since the Civil War. And the reason why it declined so far in the 1850s was the Fugitive Slave Act. Many African Americans left. The city's Black population today is about the size it was in 1940. Between 2000 and 2020, Pittsburgh lost even more as a percentage, about 23%, making it the 3rd largest decline among comparable cities in the United States. Pittsburgh lost 23%, making it the 3rd largest decline among comparable cities in the U.S. in that 20-year period, so the last 20 years. Since we've owned our house in Friendship, we've lost 23%. Only Cleveland, St. Louis have lost, not by much. And in just a decade, as you heard, 2 neighborhoods that were formerly Black, East Liberty and Point Breeze North, are no longer majority African American. In fact, if you noticed, the Strip, Lawrenceville, East Liberty, and many other areas are building housing that is not only pricing out African Americans, but pricing out anyone of moderate income. And as you heard, Manchester is in fact the most expensive Black neighborhood in the city. But this is not the first time development projects created massive disruptions to Pittsburgh. So I'm a historian, and one of the things I research about, my book talks about, is that in 1963, there were 15 urban renewal projects across the city, including the one that gutted Manchester and the Beaver Avenue corridor. It displaced about 5,700 people, mostly African American, around the city. The cost of this development at that time, in 2024 dollars, was $1.7 billion. This is 1963. This is all across the city: East Liberty, Lower Hill, Manchester, and many other projects. Today, development projects along just the North Shore dwarf that in comparison. What I mean, between 2001 and today, development projects are anticipated to cost $2.5 billion. So double what the entire city was going through with urban renewal is just happening on the north side alone. And just since 2019, $1.1 billion is projected to be spent on the North Shore. So these include the new stadiums, of course, new apartments, the Esplanade, naming rights, and many other infrastructure projects. And Pittsburgh continues to lose Black population. There's a connection. Since 2015, Pittsburgh lost nearly 700 Black homeowners, a decline of 7%. The only racial group to experience the loss of homeowners. At least in the 1960s, Black Pittsburgh was growing, about 5% between 1960 and 1970. But as I've just mentioned, the last decade, we've lost 10,000, more than 10,000 African Americans, and the trend is still going down. Many are moving to the south, but many are leaving the city and relocating in areas just outside the city where it's more affordable. So I have a series of questions, but I want to kind of drill down to what's happening in Manchester. And the question that Stanley's posed to me many times is Manchester Pittsburgh's next vanishing Black neighborhood? And so as you heard, just in 10 years, Manchester lost about 5% of its total population, which isn't a lot. But the Black population declined by 24%. So the neighborhood has lost almost a quarter of its African American population in 10 years. Meanwhile, the white population in Manchester increased by 69%. In 2010, Manchester was nearly 80% Black. In 2020, it was 63%. And that's a loss of not only people, voters, and wealth, but also of identity to a certain extent. And as was explained, median home values in 2010 were $94,000, and was just explained now is $220,000. These rapidly rising housing prices and out-migration of African Americans threatens Manchester's appeal as a affordable neighborhood for African Americans, which was its original vision when Stanley took the helm back in 1972. As a whole, these future developments threaten to make Manchester increasingly unaffordable and unattractive to low and moderate income African Americans. So I want to end with just a series of questions that these data raise, and they include the following. To what extent will these projects benefit Manchester? What impact will this have on individual property values and tax assessments? How will these projects impact traffic and parking issues? How will these projects affect the historic fabric of Manchester and other historic Northside neighborhoods? What will be the impact on crime? Do these projects come with additional police enforcement? How many units of affordable housing will be created? How many jobs will be created for African Americans? what opportunities exist to comment to the city planning and city zoning commissions in particular, let alone the Historic Review Commission. To what extent will Manchester residents have a say in the design, color, height, mass, and shape of these developments? And then finally, where do elected officials stand, and to what extent will they work to ensure that Manchester stays affordable and safe for African Americans? So these are just some of the questions I'm sure many of you have already been asking that it jumped out at me when I studied these data. So I'm sorry I'm not as lively as our previous speaker, but this does offer a sobering assessment of some key indicators affecting African Americans in Pittsburgh. And this is why Stanley had asked me to come to talk to you today about these figures. So thank you for considering this information. I'm honored to speak, as always, to work in number one neighborhood in Pittsburgh. So God bless.